the eighth Yortzeit, yeah. It's hard to believe the eighth Yortzeit. Okay.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to our annual get-together. Ilui Nishmas, Yechezkel, Yaakov Moshe. The first mission in Pirkei Avos, this is something that I was a seder that I had with Yechezkel Zechron Livracha in Pirkei Avos. Really? My voice is usually very strong. That's interesting. You don't hear me like this, we're in trouble. What? Okay, you're right. We'll wait for the mic. Yeah. The Rabbeinu Avadra Bar Tanura, the first mission of Pirkei Avos, asks a very obvious question that everyone should really ask. Pirkei Avos starts off with a history lesson. Moshe Kibul Torah Sinai. It's very nice to know about the Masorah, but what's it doing here in Pirkei Avos? Right. So the Rav says, "Omer ani lefisha mesechah zu eino miyusedes al pi mitzvah mitzvahs haTorah." Right. This Masechta, to be included it's in Seder Nezikin, part of Shas, has nothing to do with any of the mitzvahs of the Torah, or rabbinic mitzvahs. It's kulo, the lashon of the Rav is kulo musrim umidos. And the Chachamim of the Umos HaOlam, also today, many self-help books, unbelievable advice, Eigth on all kinds of issues, marriage and all kinds of social issues, and people, all kinds of ways to help a person to grow, personal growth. Chachmei U'Masolim also wrote many works dealing with Musar Midos. Comes along the Tana wants to teach us that the Musar Midos shebezu HaMasechta lo badu osam Chachmei HaMishnah milibam af elu nemer b'Sinai. You have to know that even the advice, the Tanoim, all the advice in Pirkei Avos has at its roots Sinai. Comes from Sinai. It's a very, very important lesson. We talk about every year about Benam L'Chaver, which was certainly, that was something that was very unique and special. Yechezkel really was outstanding, his outstanding qualities in the area of Benam L'Chaver, Midos Tovos. But the thing was that it was all motivated from Yiras Shamayim. It came from an understanding that this is Ratzon Hashem. It's a very important point. People have natural tendencies, and people have midos that are inborn, and or even sometimes given to them by their parents the way they were brought up. But when it's coming through personal growth, striving to be a better person, because that is Ratzon Hashem, that's the highest level. I don't know if I said this over last year, this word. In the beginning of In Shmos, we said it over at the Shabbos table this week. The Mialdos. Right, the Mialdos, Shifra and Pua, questions asked, what was so great, the Mialdos, that they saved the Jewish children, right? I mean, how many people, even people who are not religious, people who are even atheists, humanists, go ahead and kill, even to save their own lives, to go ahead and kill, infanticide, to go ahead and kill, thousands and thousands of babies. So what was so great, Shifra and Pua? They saved the babies. They weren't gonna do it. Many people just couldn't do it from just rachamim, basic mercy. So if you look in the Torah, the Psukim, it's very, very clear there that the reward for Shifra and Pua was not because they saved the babies. It says clearly, because Vayiru Am Yaldos Es Elokim Vayaslam Batim. Right, the reward was because they had the Yiras Shamayim. Means their act of mercy, their saving the children was totally motivated by Yiras Shamayim. That's the highest madrega. And you see that, by the way, Rashi says. What's the difference between when the act is motivated by Yiras Shamayim and it's just, I can't do it, how can I kill the babies? It says, what's the end of the pasuk? It says that by Vatran Am Yaldos Es Elokim, it says Rashi brings Mesaklos Emayim Umazon. Lo asu kasher diber lemelech Mitzrayim, right? Vatchayenes hayeladim. That's the lashon. Vatchayenes hayeladim. Says Rashi, Mesaklos Emayim Umazon. When it's motivated by Yiras Shamayim, everything, the whole act have to be weighed. What does the Rebbeinu Shalom want? Not only they didn't kill the babies, they took care of the babies, they fed the babies, they nourished the babies. That's when it's coming from Yiras Shamayim. And that was something that Yechezkel used to always talk about, that the Musar and Midos, right, those qualities, it's constantly has to be, what is the Ratzon Hashem? Today, before we introduce our speaker, we have some in addition to this week, this year. I forgot his first name again. Rabbi Ephraim. Rabbi Ephraim Shor, he's going to read for us an article that Yechezkel wrote.
Okay. Yechezkel wrote this article called Here Today, Gone Tomorrow on June 26, 2002, which was 2 years before he was murdered. The other day, something happened on my way past the gas station. The local gas station near Beitar has a series of stores in its complex. An Israeli man, whom I don't know that well, owns one of the stores. Over the years, I've had the occasional opportunity to speak to him briefly, and he's just a regular guy with a store. His name is Roni. Roni is about 40-ish, maybe older. He's tall, a refined and gracious sort of chap. His store is located at a junction that services many of the local homes and settlements. I heard a while back that Roni is more famous than I knew. His sister, Rina Dudovsky, was murdered during Hanukkah in the early months of the Al-Aqsa uprising. Her murder shocked the nation. Ironically, that happened in the days when people thought the war would end any day. It happened so early during the uprising that we were positive that the government would deal a death blow to the Palestinians. The other day, I happened by the gas station with a friend. I decided to seize the opportunity to do a good deed. Despite the here today, gone tomorrow awkwardness of the moment. I approached Roni. After shooting the breeze for a couple of moments, I looked at him and said, "Roni, I heard that your sister was Rina." His warm, friendly smile changed as granite pain etched its way across his face in an instantaneous and unmistakable way. "I just wanted to tell you, I'm sorry about your loss." After what seemed like an eternity, Roni finally spoke. Looking out over the horizon of Gush Etzion, he said, "I would never wish such a tragedy on anyone. It's something beyond belief." And then Roni told me about his kid sister Rina. He spoke about her husband and her children and how they have tried to scratch their way back into a life of normalcy. He spoke about his family and how they're struggling to pick up the pieces. I just listened. Tears welled up in my eyes. A large lump formed in my throat, and I just stood there and listened. And as Roni spoke, I thought to myself, here today, gone tomorrow. Life is so sudden and shocking sometimes. One day life is normal and everything is fine, and the next day, God forbid, life will never be the same again. One day, Kobe was just like any other regular kid playing with his friends, doing the things teenagers do. At home, his Michael Jordan and Cal Ripken posters hung in his room just as they had hung in his bedroom in the USA before his family moved to Israel. Kobe Mendel was a teenager like any other. Life went on without skipping a beat. Then the next day came along, and everything changed. Kobe and his friend decided to play in the wadi 200 meters from his home. They just wanted to hang out. Gosh, hanging out with your friends is what teenagers like to do, no matter where they live. As Kobe and his buddy were hanging out in the wadi a short distance from the sanctuary of his house, terrorists, or just bloodthirsty Arabs, preyed upon the two boys, violated their innocence, and murdered them in cold blood. The grotesque details of the murder are beyond belief. Last month, I heard Kobe's father, Rabbi Seth Mendel, speak at the Washington, D.C. rally via the wonders of C-SPAN on the internet. Seth spoke about the Sbarro bombing. In particular, he reminded the audience of the story of the family who had traveled to Yerushalayim for some respite from the ongoing war. Standing in line for a slice of pizza, the lives of both parents and 3 of their children were suddenly cut short by the madness of a suicide bomber. Amidst the terror and carnage of Sbarro, amidst the smell of burning flesh and flowing blood, mixed with soft drinks, pizza, and pasta, amidst the stench of smoke and devastation, members of the family struggled between life and death. The little 4-year-old boy was lying on the ground. He called out to his father, "Abba, save me." The boy's father reached out to hold his son's hand and said, "Son, say the Shema with me." There, amidst the chaos and devastation, father and son held hands, said the first line of the Shema word by word, and there they died together, holding hands. As Rabbi Mendel related the story, the hundreds of thousands attending the Capitol Hill rally were stone silent. I could hear via C-SPAN that if a pin had dropped on Capitol Hill, the whole world would have heard it. Then, Seth Mendel said the following line, a line that will haunt me for the rest of my life. I wasn't with Kobe when he died. I didn't get to say Shema with Kobe. Please say the Shema with me now for my son Kobe. And then Seth Mendel, together with the hundreds of thousands of people assembled, said the first line of the Shema, word by word. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. I've related the story of Seth Mendel's words countless times to people around the world. Each and every person to whom I told this story started to cry. There are many lessons I have learned from the war we have been living through. However, I feel that perhaps the most profound lesson that I learned is about how to look at life. Rena and her brother Roni taught me a lesson in life. Kobe and his father Seth taught me the same lesson in life. Each and every victim who was taken suddenly reminds us of this lesson. Each and every family that has been plunged into a family tragedy beyond their most horrific nightmares reinforces this same lesson. Here today, gone tomorrow. It's not just a phrase. It's become a theme. Just because we're here today, we should not assume that tomorrow is a given. We need to reflect on those individuals whom we love. We need to remind ourselves of what they mean in our lives. And then we need to take action by telling them how much we appreciate them. We need to do it today. We should not wait to tell our children that we love them. We should never assume that I can tell them tomorrow. We should never lose sight of the reality that each and every day that we live is a gift. The gift is the opportunity to take care of our business with those we love before the opportunity slips away or is, God forbid, torn away from us. Roni's story reminds me how fragile life is and how the rut of daily living sometimes puts us in such a deep sleep that those we love become as incidental in our lives as strangers. The look in Roni's eyes, the look of longing for his younger sister, was a haunting warning. Appreciate your loved ones today while you can. Seth Mendel's saga, in his effective speech in Washington, created a powerful directive that we should not put off simple yet special moments in life. Saying Shema with one's children suddenly takes on a whole new dimension. After tragedy has struck these families, even remembering which posters hang in our children's bedroom becomes special mementos. We need to take notice of what is important to our children. We need to take notice even of the little things. Each day in this world is a blessing. The blessing that each day holds is the good fortune for each and every one of us to share that blessing with those we love. Maybe in some way, those in mourning such as Roni and Seth and their families will be comforted by the thought that others have learned a life-changing lesson from their heart-wrenching tragedy. Yechezkel Goldberg.
Thank you, Rabbi Chaim. I think the article speaks for itself. I'd like to introduce Dovid Orlofsky, and we certainly want to thank Rabbi Orlofsky for coming every year and inspiring us with the Yechezkel.
It's ironic. As I was walking up, I saw the poster, and I said to my wife, how come Yechezkel gets bigger billing than I do? I'm the one speaking. It ends up I was wrong. He's the one speaking. I have to follow him. And, Rabbi Orlofsky once said, He says, I don't have to go to Gehenna anymore. I spoke after Dovid Orlofsky. I can say the same thing now. I was giving a class in the Vei Yerushalayim on marriage, and I was talking about how long do you have to date. So someone said, until you know everything about the person. I said, there's no way that you're going to date that long. It's impossible. So how can you get married without knowing, how could I marry someone if they don't know my favorite color? And suddenly I realized I'm going to be married 30 years this June, and I don't know what my wife's favorite color is. I asked her, and I don't feel so bad because she doesn't know either. You think, we're doing this how many years?
This is the eighth.
Eighth.
8 years. And you think, well, you heard it all. There's always another level, another layer. I used to run NCSY in Long Island, and people used to buy me inspirational posters. Now, I'm using the word inspirational very loosely. Inspirational for me, I remember one of them said, if they're running you out of town, grab a baton and make it look like a parade, which I thought was inspirational for me. There was another one which was a Ziggy poster, and it was very profound. It said, it's always darkest before it's pitch black. I've thought about that a lot over the past 30 years, and I always gain new insights into that. Because, you think like, wow, like this is as bad as it's going to get, I think I spoke once, Yechezkel brought me out for his father, and the title he chose is, The Light at the End of the Tunnel, It Might Be Another Train. So, you think that things are going to go. Anyway, Parshas Shmos ends on a very bitter note. And obviously these parshios are the parshios of Geula, and these are the parshios that we need to be able to integrate if we're going to bring the Geula. And as among the Hasidim in particular, these weeks are known as the weeks of Shovavim. Rashi Tevos, Shmos ve'era bo b'shalach Yisro and Mishpatim, because there's a special koach of tshuva during these weeks, the weeks of the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim and Matan Torah, which is what those parshios encapsulate. So when you read the story and you read it with a certain perspective, it's amazing how often you can get new insights into our own lives. This is, by the way, parenthetically, the challenge of the Pesach Seder. The challenge of the Pesach Seder is to tell the same story that's been told for 3,300 years, to use the same text that's been used for almost 2,000 years, and to speak to us in our generation. B'chol dor v'dor, chayiv adam liros es atzma. It's not enough to tell the story about them. We have to tell the story about us. So, Moshe Rabbeinu is out with his sheep, and he sees a burning bush. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu engages him. And he says, I want you to go down to Egypt. And he says, me, who am I to go down to Egypt? And who says Bnei Yisrael deserves to be saved? And for a week, they're arguing and discussing. And it's an amazing idea. I mean, that deserves a discussion in itself. But the very idea that, Kodesh Baruch Hu will appear to you in a burning bush and tell you to go and do something, and you're like, nah, I don't think so, I feel pretty secure that if I knew it was a Kodesh Baruch Hu, even without a burning bush, and he told me to do something, I would for sure do it. I think. I mean, I'm pretty secure there. You never know a situation until you're there. Of course, the more correct thing to do would be to say yes. I made this mistake many years ago. Many years ago. I was a relatively young Baal Tshuva, and I was home, and one of the Shabbos candles fell over onto the dining room table. And my father quickly put it out. And my brother said to him, you're not allowed to do that. He says, what are you talking about? The whole house would have burnt down. He says, so? The house would have burnt down. Not allowed to put it out. He says, but it's a risk of life. He says, no, it's not. You could have gotten out of here in time. We could have just got everybody walked out and just stood outside if the house burnt down. He says, that can't be the law. He says, yeah, that's the law. He says, David, what would you do? So I said, what's the law, or what would I do? I can't tell you what I would do until I'm actually in that situation. I hope I would do the right thing. But you never really know. You never really know what you would do. That was a serious mistake. From that point onwards, my father would always say, David, he's practical. There's the law, and then he knows what you should do. So now I always say, yes, that's what I would do. You never know, you'll find yourself in a situation. When my son Yaakov was young, we were driving in the car, and he says, Abba, where are we going? I said, we're going to a mountain. So mountain, why? Hashem came to me last night, and he told me to bring you up on the mountain. There's an Ola. He says, Abba, don't joke. I said, you think I would joke about something like that? Anyway, he figured out that it wasn't serious. But for a while there, it was a little touch and go. But anyway, be that as it may. So, it's okay, everyone can stand up for the Reb. I don't mind. He deserves it, and there's nothing that I'm saying that can't be interrupted. Okay, so that's the story, right? Okay, so we understand that these are messages that have relevance to our lives and meaning to our lives, etc., right? Okay. So, Hashem finally says to Moshe, gets upset, and says, listen, just do what I say. And he says, okay. And he comes, and he's very concerned. He says, Bnei Yisrael's not going to believe me. He says, here's one nose, here's another nose, here's a third nose. You'll see for sure that they're going to believe you. He says, okay, okay. And he shows him the osos, and sure enough, Bnei Yisrael believes him. V'ye'eman ha'am v'yishma'u ki pakad Hashem es Bnei Yisrael v'ki ro'a es onyam v'yiktu v'yishtachavu. Wow, this is the Geula. And now he comes to Paro. And he says, let my people go. V'yom Paro, mi Hashem, asher eshma b'kolo, l'shalach es Yisrael, lo yudati es Hashem, v'gam Yisrael lo ashalech. And he says, not only that, Paro says, he says, I don't understand, what's Moshe and Aaron bothering everybody for? Yeah? So here's what we're going to do. Mitzav Paro b'yomahu, as a noixim ba'am, v'yashotru b'leima, lo sosifon lo seis teben la'am, lo bona l'veinam kismol shulsham, hem yolchu v'kishushu lehem teben. I'm not giving them any more straw to make the bricks. Let them go out and find the straw and let them make it themselves. And they have to produce the same amount of bricks. Tichbad ha'avoda al hanoshim v'yasu bo v'al yishu b'divrei shoket. Make the work hard on the people, make sure that they do it, and they won't be involved in these false thoughts anymore. So sure enough, that's what they do, and the people are now getting beaten because with this added burden of trying to get the straw and still produce the same amount of bricks, it's impossible. And they come out and they see Moshe and Aaron, and they said, look what you've done. You made us stink. And you've given them a sword to kill us with. Why did you do bad to these people? What did you send me for? I told you I didn't want to go. I told you I didn't want to do this. Here you send me. I bring everybody together. I tell them this is the Geula. Everybody's hopes are built up. And then I go in there and bam! Things are worse than they ever were. And the people are angry at me, and the people are angry, with their lot, and everything's worse, and everything's miserable. And Hashem says, okay, now you see the Yeshua begin. It's for another discussion why HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to do it this way. That's another thing. But clearly it was obviously something that needed to be done. Right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu knew what he was doing. It put Moshe in an uncomfortable position. I think he would have liked to have had a little in on this. Nonetheless, after this whole thing is done, you see that now HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Moshe, it says, okay, now the action's going to start. Go back and tell Bnei Yisrael. And a dramatic change takes place. In this week's parasha, he comes to them, and he tells them, now it's going to start. V'yidaber Moshe came up in Israel. V'lo shomil Moshe. Mikoitzer ruach me'avoda kasha. They don't listen to him from the shortness of life and the hard work. He came to them, the situation was terrible. And he says to them, this is it. Here comes the Yeshua, good things are going to come. He goes into Paro, and things get worse. And when he comes back to them, they don't hear him anymore. Something changed. Something changed from when he came the first time. Paro did something that managed to change the people, break their spirit, shorten their will to live, take away everything from them. What is it that he did? So there's a number of mafarshim on this. I'm going to turn to something that's perhaps atypical when trying to explain a posik, but one that I find incredibly important, and that is the Mesilas Yesharim. Mesilas Yesharim, the Sefer, is written by Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. The purpose is to teach us how to reach the highest possible levels of Avodas Hashem. That's the whole purpose of the Sefer. And the truth is, I remember I heard from somebody with a I heard from somebody, another Gadol, who said Mesilas Yesharim is not accessible to us today. And the truth is that it's probably the Sefer that is the most started and least finished Sefer among all the Svarim that have ever been translated into English. I think part of that is because of the English translation. Because if you have the old translation, you almost never use words like watchfulness and zeal. And if you have the new translation, you almost never use words like vigilance and alacrity. They just don't come up in normal conversation. And because people are often very careful to translate accurately, they end up not translating correctly, which is a little bit of a trick. Because the difference between the Art Scroll translation of the Chumash and the Aryeh Kaplan translation is that the Art Scroll is much more, word by word, whereas Aryeh Kaplan translates it into English. Art Scroll translates it into a dialect which is very similar to English, but is not actual English. And the Mesilas Yesharim suffers from the same thing. One of the many projects that I'm almost about to start, as soon as I finish all of the other projects that I started, is to come up with a new translation of Mesilas Yesharim to make it more accessible. But the truth is that it's all heavy Kabbalah, but he wrote it in such a way that you can't tell. And luckily, if you learn it on a pshat level, there's still a tremendous amount we can get. This Adam Gadol learns it on a very deep level, so he didn't get it. Because he's like, how can anyone understand this? And the answer is, I can, because I'm learning it on a simple level. So if we learn it on a simple level, we can. So how do you become perfect? Right? I know, I've finished the Sefer a number of times, so I'm in a position to say this. I got stuck on a Nava, but once I got that down, the rest was relatively easy. But in any event, the first step he gives you is Zehiris. Zehiris, which I do not translate either as watchfulness or vigilance, because he defines it in Perek Beis as a person to be careful in his actions and his ways. To think and examine your actions and your midos and say, is this good or bad? If I had to translate that into English, I would say it's a person who is a thinking person. So you could argue, you could use thinking in a lot of different ways, and that's true. That's always one of the problems with translations, that a lot of different words can be understood in many different ways, I think we agree that if you translate when the Torah says pre-bitna as fruit of the womb, as I saw one place write it, it really sounds like an ad for a particular clothing company, and I think that's a mistake. You see, although it's literally correct, it's really not a good translation, So you have to always try to look at it and understand what it's trying to say. So to me, Zehiris means thinking. You have to be a person who's thinking. And he says that the person who doesn't think is lower than animals, because animals have a self-preservation instinct. And if we just walk into a dangerous situation without looking, A person who just walks across the minefield and hopes for the best is going against his self-preservation instinct. You know, a person who stands there and allows themselves to get attacked. I had a Rabbi of mine who once said to me, you know, if only you could learn to use your mind for good instead of evil. And I've tried to take that to heart. And I feel like all of the nonsense that I've picked up during my life is really there for us to gain insights in. You know, so in the 1950s, there was this TV show called Superman. You have to be old enough and be American to know what I'm talking about. But there was this guy, whatever his Judge Reeves. Anyway, he would crash through a wall, a stone wall. Now, if criminals aren't maybe not the smartest guys in the world, but you figure out if the guy crashed through the wall, at this point, you should just surrender, right? But they don't. They decide to try to shoot him. And they pull out their guns and they start shooting. And Superman stands like this as the bullets bounce off his chest. Now at this point, okay, you saw him crash to the wall, you tried to shoot him 6 times, the bullets bounce off his chest. What's their next brilliant move? They throw the gun at him. And what does Superman do? He ducks. Each time he would like duck. Because, you know, you want to shoot him, he's one thing, but you don't get hit in the head with a gun, it's going to hurt, you know? It's automatic. When something's coming at you, you duck. And a person who just walks through without looking where they're going, you're lower than animals. Right? It's only here in Israel that you really get to see this, you know, because, you know, they say, no, Chayvetz Chashud, and everybody runs to take a look, you know? Which part of this are you not following, you know? They said lower than the animals. When animal is danger, the rabbit comes out of his hole. He doesn't just come out of his hole. He lifts up, he sniffs, he listens, and then he takes 2 short hops, stops, sits up on his hind legs, listens again, sniffs again, and then he starts eating. And he keeps stopping from time to time to check. That's natural, because there'll be a fox someplace, you know, going to come and eat you, you know? So you want to look around, you want to make sure, you want to be careful, you know? So a person has to go through life thinking, and not close your eyes. And he says, he brings from Yirmiyahu, this is what led to the Churban, because it says everybody just goes along in their own habits without thinking. Shu barutzam kisus shotef b'muchama. They go like a horse rushing into battle, right? Rushing into battle. You have to appreciate what this means, right? Lord Tennyson wrote the famous poem, "The Charge of the Light Brigade." Cannons on the left of them, cannons on the right of them, cannons in front of them, volleyed and thundered. Ours is not to question why, ours is but to do and die. Into the valley of death, into the joys of hell, rode the 600. No, there's more, don't worry. You thought you gave it up after you finished English class? Forget about it, it comes back to haunt you. It's like when a person sits through Dr. Schroeder and they're like, I'm back in physics class, I can't believe this, you know. I was one of the kids who took earth science. But anyway, he's describing this battle that took place in the Crimean War, where the Light Brigade, thus called because they were lightly armed and lightly protected, were ordered to attack an artillery installation. And so they charged while all the world wondered. Yeah, you gotta wonder what 600 guys with sabers are gonna do against cannons. And the guys behind the cannons really wondered, are these guys out of their minds? And they began to just blow them away, which is what you do to people coming at you with a sword when you've got a cannon. You see, that's sort of an unequal thing. Though they realized someone had blundered. Yeah, I would say so at that point. Anyway, they charge in, and this is a poem that tells us about the strength of character, and, you know, following orders, discipline, and all this kind of stuff. All of that's beautiful. But what about the horses? What were the horses thinking at this point? When you see, like, your friend horses being blown away, you're like, you know, I gotta be out of my mind. This guy's nuts. You know what I'm saying? But there's no reason that I gotta get blown away. I'm just a horse. I'm really not invested in this, you know? Stonewall Jackson at the first Battle of Bull Run had 3 horses shot out from under him. There is no question that if I was that 3rd horse, I would throw this guy and run for the hills. Because whether the north winds or the south winds, the best thing I have to look forward to is a bag of oats. And either one of them will give me that bag of oats as long as I plow the field. You know what I mean? And what in the world am I doing standing under this maniac when everybody's shooting at him? But war horses are trained to just charge, and they don't ask questions. They just keep going. Says Yirmiyahu, that's us. We just get into a habit and we just keep going, and nobody stops to think. It's an art form to think, and people don't think. I don't know if this is still true, but when I was a young man and I came to Israel and I was on Tiolim, so there was a law in the Sachnut that if you wanted to get funding, then everybody had to be served petel and these absolutely tasteless cookies. You remember this? They had these big giant boxes of tasteless cookies. And somebody's job would be in charge to bring around the large box of tasteless cookies. And they would say, you want a cookie? And everyone would say, sure. And they would take these cookies. And they were terrible. They were horrible. And everybody would take them and eat them because someone said, do you want a cookie? And who's going to say no? And the person came to me and said, do you want a cookie? And I said, no. And the person didn't even know what to do. And he pauses for a moment. And then he says again, do you want a cookie? And I said, no. And he said, everybody takes a cookie. I said, they're totally tasteless. They turn to powder in your mouth. I can't even swallow them. They're terrible. Why would I take them? And he thinks for a moment and turns to the next person. Want a cookie? And the person says, sure. Takes a cookie. Because we're absolutely mindless. People just do things without thinking. I'll speak for myself here, because I had another Rabbi who once said to me, everybody has a purpose in life. Yours is to be a bad example. So, I'll use myself. There's a reason I turned out the way I did. Trust me. Anyway, I don't know if this has ever happened to you. I know it's happened to me. You ever make yourself a cup of coffee, and then you look at the cup, and it's empty, and you don't remember having drunk it? And you're like, did I have this coffee? Did somebody else drink my coffee? What happened to my coffee? How could this have suddenly disappeared? The answer is because you're mindless. We're mindless. We do things without thinking. We just go. We just go. You know, people do things. People say things. People, are capable of doing just really terrible things, not because they're bad, just because it's out of habit. They don't stop to think about it. They're not challenged. And people just get used to it, like a war horse rushing into battle. And now he says the following. This is one of the tricks of the Yetzer Hara, that he wants to keep the avoda constantly on the hearts of people. On the hearts of people. What does he mean by that? I'll read from this because I want to get to our part. He writes something that's absolutely astounding. I saw two different Mefarshim on Mesilas Yesharim that tries to wish this line away because it's just so unbelievable. Actually, he doesn't want to leave them any space to be able to stop and think or even to look at where they're going. Revach is wide open space. The opposite of that is tsar, narrow. Kolam kulo geshet tsar ma'od, very narrow. So, if you are in Mitzrayim, you're in a makom that's tsar. And Kodesh Baruch Hu takes us to Israel, Eretz Chemda Tova Urchava, which is wide open. But this is a place that's tsar. He says he doesn't want to leave you any space. This is the line that they try to wish away. Because he knows that if people would pay attention even a little bit to what they're doing, Vadai, definitely, Shemiyad, then immediately, they would begin to regret their actions. Until they completely abandon their sinful behavior. So people say, well, we say it's not true because we see people think today and they don't change their lives. The mistake that they're making is people don't think. Even people who think don't think. What do I mean? They used to say in Musar, you see somebody pinch somebody's cheek and he says, oh, it hurts. He says, I don't know, I pinch my cheek, it doesn't hurt. Because I don't pinch my cheek the way I pinch your cheek. You understand? Because when I say it to you, it doesn't hurt me. When I say to me, it hurts. People are willing to think to a certain point until it gets uncomfortable. What are the implications? How far am I going to take this? There was this group that came from Los Angeles, and they brought me in to speak to the group. I said, well, what have they been? They've been here for 2 weeks. I said, well, tomorrow is like, they're leaving. They have a free day shopping, and then they're leaving. I said, well, what have they covered so far, Jewishly? Nothing. They had some classes on politics. They had one on general thing on relationships. Nothing on Judaism. He says, you're it. I said, that's it? I have one class to try to teach about Judaism? He said, the most important thing is don't be pushy. I said, me? Anyway, so I was in the room, and there's like, blonde, blue-eyed, happy Jews, obviously not from. And I have to try to make an impression on them. So I would just go around the room, and I would say, "Hi, what's your name?" Steve. Steve, are you Jewish? He says, "Yeah." Is that important to you? He says, "Yeah." He says, "So what are you going to do when your kids ask you, why should I be Jewish?" He says, "Because it's the best way to live." I said, "Oh, so you're going to keep it?" "What do you mean?" The whole thing." "Well, I mean, some things." "What do you mean, some things? This is the best way to live, right?" Before you could answer, I turned to the next. "What's your name?" "Susan." "Oh, yeah, Susan." So what do you tell your kids when you're Jewish?" "I mean, it's true." "Ah, so you're going to keep it, right? The whole thing." "Well, I mean, if it's true, you don't want to live a lie, right? And I'm going around the room, and, whatever they say, I'm basically following it through. The woman who's in charge of the group is ripping her hair out of the bag, what is happening, And finally I find this one guy. I decided I'm finished being nice. And I was like, I said, "Why are you going to tell your kids?" "It's true, it's the best way, I don't know." I said, "So you're going to keep it, right?" I don't know." "What do you mean, Shabbos? Shabbos is a beautiful thing, right? It's family time, stop the world and get off, opportunity to stop it. It's a great thing, right? Shabbos, you're going to keep Shabbos?" "Okay." Conscious, spiritually sensitive diet raises us from the level of an animal. It's a great thing to keep kosher, right? "Okay." Going down the list, and finally he gets his gumption up, he looks at me and says, "But I'll never put on a black hat." I said, "You know what? I'm not telling you to put on a black hat. But let me ask you a question," I said. "Let's say I open up the Torah and I find a verse that says, 'Thou shalt wear a black hat.' What then?" You see? And people are very interesting. People are willing to think to a point where it becomes uncomfortable. What's the implication of this? I may have told this story, I don't remember, in past years. I was in America with one of my former Talmidim, and my brother lent me his van. And we were going to go to New York, to Manhattan, we were going to go to Central Park. And Jews, it's a genetic thing. We are capable of spending $80,000 on a car, but we cannot pay for parking. You just can't. So I'm circling around Central Park looking for a parking space. You understand what that's like? In a van, and I finally, kids are getting crazy. I said, "Fine, I'll go and pay." I pull into one of these parking lots near Central Park, Now this was 1989, so I know the rates have gone up since then, but think of this as $1989, So they said, it's $16 an hour. No, it's going to be $18 an hour. I said, $18 an hour? Well, that's a rip-off. He says, "Hey, you want to go back out there?" I was like, "All right, fine. And the guy looks and he says, "Oh, it's a van? It's double." 36. "You crooks, I can't believe that. I have no choice. What am I going to do?" Fine, I parked the van, We go to Central Park. We had the New York experience. You live here a long time, you forget what it's like, You don't get always the opportunity to see drug addicts and drunks and strange people and all kinds of stuff and then things in disrepair and graffiti. So it was a really New York experience, And then I come back to the van. I made sure to keep it under an hour. I said, "Keep walking. See this? Okay, good. Let's go." I'm not paying for 2 hours, And I get back to the van, and there's a new guy on, and he says, "Okay, $18. And I stood like Yosef HaTzadik. And I said through clenched teeth, is it the same price for a van? And he said, oh, you're right, it's $36. Thank you very much. So the guy I was with said to me, wow, what a tzaddik you are. I said, it's easy to be a tzaddik for $18. I said, but I know 3 people in Har Nof that year whose cars were stolen. I know that sounds like a Hasidic group, cars stolen. But 3 people whose cars were stolen. And they were asked the same question by the insurance company, all 3 of them, and they all knew the implications of the answer. All 3 of them asked, was your alarm on? And all 3 of them told the truth and said no. And they got no money for their car. 3 people. One guy said to me, you know, he said to me, well, it's an insurance company, this, but because of this, maybe it's not an individual, that. And I said to him, you love me so much, you're willing to lie and steal from me? Oh, I didn't know what a friend you were, you know? To him, it was a double portion. It's a double portion. How far are you willing to take the truth? How far does it go? And at what point do you say, this is too uncomfortable, I don't want to think about this anymore? I have spoken with people about issues in their lives, and they say to me, I don't want to talk about this, I don't want to talk, I don't want to talk. Sometimes they literally cover their ears. I don't want to hear this. You know, it's too painful. I don't want to think about it because I don't like the implications. What if that means I have to change something dramatic in my life? What if I have to do something? What if... So we think to a certain point, and when it starts to get uncomfortable, when it hurts too much, we stop pinching our own cheeks. I don't think the Mesilas Yesharim is wrong. I think the Mesilas Yesharim is right. If people would really think, if people would really look at their lives, honestly, yeah? I think I told this story, but it doesn't make a difference. Jonathan Rosenwald tells the story about these 3 screenwriters who were having brunch in Los Angeles. And this front family walks by, coming back from shul. And they look at them. And one guy says to his friends, you know, we'll never have what they have. I was like, yeah, you're right. And all 3 of them became from. How many people saw that? How many people saw people walk down the street with a smile on their face who were from and never thought twice about it? It never confronted them. There was nothing for them to ever think about. Because once it starts to get uncomfortable, I stop thinking. But if a person would actually stop and think, they would change their life. V'harizeh, here's the punchline, me'en atzas paro harasha, she'amar, tichbar ha'avoda ha'anosh v'yasuvah, v'al yishu b'divrei shoker. Make the avoda hard on the people, so they won't think about this anymore. She'ayu miskaven shelo lahaniach lehem revach klal. He didn't want them to leave any space for them. Levilti yidnu leiv yusimu eitzun negdoi. Elohi mishtadu lahafriya. Here's that word again. Libam. Because bonus because hasmoda avoda buti masekes. Through the never-ending work. Lahafriya libam. Paro is very smart. In general, our enemies understand us much better than we understand ourselves. You know, if you want to get insights into the true Jewish experience, you look at Paro, you look at Haman, you look at Hitler. These people understood what made Jews what they are. You look at Titus. You know, they understood what our koyach was. The Paro didn't say make more bricks. Obviously, making bricks, even though it was terrible, even though it was non-stop, even though there were kotsim and our hands were bleeding, even though a woman would miscarry into the mud and have to keep going and make her own child into a brick, didn't make a difference. That didn't stop them from thinking. It was too mindless an activity. Says Paro, I'm not going to make them make more bricks. I'm not going to give them straw. Because now, all they'll think about is straw. Lahafriya libam. You ever see the people, they're lying in bed at night, they're like, I'm so nervous, I have to take care of so much tomorrow, I got to do this, and I got to do that, and I got to do this. Says, well, that would seem to say I should get a good night's sleep, because you're not doing anything now. You have to do it all tomorrow, so why don't you get a good night's sleep? I can't, I'm too nervous worrying about what I have to do. I'm not doing it, I'm just worrying about it. A person leaving the house for the airport, something that I do on a regular basis. Where's my passports? Where's my ticket? Do I have my passport? My ticket? Wait a second. Where's my wallet? My wallet? I have my wallet. Where's my phone? My phone? Where's my wallet? Where's my ticket? My passport? My passport. Where's my bags? Oh my God, my bags. Did I put in my tefillin? And one time I went without my tefillin. I have my tefillin in? Let me check again. Where's my tefillin? Where's my, oh wait, my passport? My passport. Okay. Oh, my ticket. Oh, my ticket. My ticket. And that's it. And you're just always worrying. Do I have this? Do I have that? What's going on? You know? I can't concentrate because I'm just worried. Rabbi Dr. Avraham Twersky said that if the Mashiach would come today, he'd have a similar experience that Moshe Rabbeinu had. Nobody would listen to him, Mekotza Ruach or Me'avoda Kosher, because people can't stop. There used to be a time when people went to work and they came home. That's over. It's non-stop. People who have Blackberries, you cannot make eye contact with them. They're always checking their Blackberry. And, yeah, no, I'm listening. I'm listening and sending a text message at the same time. Which is not as bad as the teenagers who drive and text message at the same time. And they're usually in front of me. Absolutely amazing. And it's just constant. It's constant. The phone is always ringing. Things are always going. Things are always beeping. It's constant. There's no time to stop. The avoda is always a libam. And so therefore we don't have an opportunity to stop, and if we don't stop and think, that's the first step. So obviously, the Yetzer Hara is not stupid. If Zahiris is the first step to you being able to change your life, more than anything, he wants to stop you from thinking. You know how hard it is to do a cheshbon nefesh? Try it. Try taking upon yourself 3 things that I'm going to keep track of. I'm not going to evaluate my whole life. 3 things, 3 mitzvahs that are quantifiable. Like, I davened mincha, or I didn't daven mincha, check or X, things like that. Try taking track of 3 things for 6 months. See how far you get. It's hard. It's hard to keep track. Why? Because the Yetzer Hara doesn't want you to stop and think. So we'll think down the road to a particular point, and then that's as far as we can go. Lahafriya libam. Our hearts are not able to think. This is the challenge. And that's what Paro saw. They're thinking of Geula. I've got to get them to stop. And there's only one way to get them to stop, and that's to get them to think about other stuff. Constant barrage. So I want to talk about decisions, because that's really what life is all about. Life is all about making decisions. That's the heroes. And if I can teach myself how to make good decisions, so then I can change my life. That's it. And that's what the Yetzer Hara wants you to do wants to stop you from doing more than anything. Keep you from being able to make decisions. If you can make decisions, you change your life. And you see how most people are very bad at making decisions. So the Mesilas Yesharim sets up 2 steps for us, which I just want to outline. Step number 1 is you have to make a decision. Well, I should backtrack. Step number 1 is you have to define your values. And this is the hardest part. Because most people, it's impossible for them to define their values. I worked for a guy once, for an organization. I worked literally day and night. Literally day and night. And after 6 months, the person called me and said, I feel like you're not doing your job. I said, excuse me? He says, well, I don't know, what are you doing? I said, I send you regular progress reports. I've accomplished, this, and this, and this, and this, and this. He says, but you didn't do this. I said, you never told me to. He said, I know, but I want that too. I want that too. That's important too. So I learned something from that job. That is, most people have no idea of how to define. So when I take a job now, I say to them, I want you to describe to me and define for me what the job is. So that we don't meet in 6 months and you tell me, oh, you never did this. I want you to define the job for me. What are the expectations? You know how most people can't do this? They can't do it. Because To define what's really important to me, I figure it out as I go along. As one person said to me, I don't know what's important to me, but I'll know when it comes up. But to come up with a definition, and you'll see that people are impossible making their values. So I'm in Orlofsky, and they're coming in from another class, and you can see there's like, a little uncomfortableness in the room. And finally, the guy raises his hand. He says, Rabbi, can I ask you a question? I said, sure. He says, the Gemara says that if a Jew is drowning and a non-Jew is drowning, you're supposed to save the Jew. I said, yeah, that's correct. He says, so you mean that if some Jewish guy that I don't know is drowning and my father is drowning, I have to save the Jew? Okay, deep breathing. You can feel the tension in the room, and everyone's looking at me like So I was like, there's other cases in that Gemara. One of them is if your father is drowning and your Rebbe is drowning, who do you save first? You save your Rebbe. Because your father brings you into this world and your Rebbe brings you into the next world. I know some parents who were upset about that Gemara. And I said to one particular father, how often do you think this comes up? I said, if you're nervous when you're getting on a boat, check the roster. If you see your son's Rebbe's there, take the next boat. This is not really halacha l'maisa. What's the point of it? The point is that the only way to make a person take a decision is to create a conflict. When I was running NCSY, so this is the decision I wanted to make. There are two caterers. One, his food is good, he's inexpensive, and he's reliable. The other one is unreliable, his food is bad, and he's more expensive. Which one should I choose? But I never got decisions like that. I got choices like, one guy, his food is crummy, but he's reliable and he's cheap, and the other guy, his food is great, but he's expensive and unreliable. Which one do you take? That's how it is with life, To be able to find, I was just talking to some single girls over Shabbos, at my house for a Suda, and I said, there are certain people, they go out with somebody, and the person seems like really good, but how do I know the next person won't be better? I said, it's always possible, the next person will be better. They said, yeah, you're right. I said, we have a term for this in Judaism. I said, what's it called? Older singles. Because there's always a chance that the next person, so by the time you're like 70, 80 in the old age home, and you get the walker, and there's mama, it's Mrs. Hobbs, and you're still trying to strike up a conversation, At some point, you're right. I don't know. You got to make a decision. And in order to make a decision, you got to decide what's most important to you. You have to define your values. I don't know the answer to this. Someone told it to me, and I was so astounded by the question that I didn't pay attention to the answer. I'm sorry, because people always ask me the answer. Shlomo Zalman Auerbach had to go through a procedure. And if he did one particular procedure, it might leave him deaf. If he did the other one, it would leave him blind. So which one did he choose? I don't remember. That's not important. I was just thinking to myself, my gosh, you have to choose between seeing and hearing. That's a situation where you have to make a decision. What's most important to me? What's most important to me? How does a person make a decision like that? And it's only by coming up with what my real values are that I'm able to make decisions. Once I have my values, there's two steps. There's what he calls the Shas Maisa and Shelo B'Shas Maisa. Shas Maisa means I have no choice. I have to make a decision right now. Right now I have to make a decision. It's nice if you have an opportunity to think about it, speak to people, to call a lifeline, to poll the studio audience, but very often you don't get that opportunity. I have this little clip that somebody sent me. I have it on my computer. I've watched it at least 100 times. I could watch it 500 times. The whole thing is about 5 seconds. It's from a traffic camera in a midtown intersection. The light turns red, and this guy in a business suit with a briefcase is sort of like trotting across the street, and you see in the background that this truck lost control and smashed into the cars, and the whole thing, all these cars are zooming now at him. And he glances, and he walks faster, and he misses it literally by an inch. I've asked this to different people, they're like, I'd probably freeze. I'm like, you've got a second. You've got to make a decision. Right now I have to make a decision. You're a pilot, you get on the plane, you do that silly safety announcement, which they do all the time. I've flown maybe over 100 flights. You still have to teach me how to put on a seatbelt? It's 2012, you know what I mean? If you don't know how to put on a seatbelt, then just ask the stewardess. Say, anyone who's not put on a seatbelt, I have to show you how to put on a seatbelt? They've had them since the 1950s. You know what I mean? So, the seatbelt is that, look for the executives, okay, fine. It's silly, I mean, the guy is flying, and suddenly all these birds fly into his motors, and all the motors go dead. Now, you're flying this rather large plane filled with people, and it's not flying. So you got to make a decision. Can I try to land in an airport? It's kind of hard, I don't really have too much. I'm going to land in the Hudson River. And so he sort of steers the plane, and he lands in the Hudson River, and he tells everybody, okay, let's all get off the plane. Everybody gets off, they're all standing on the wings. Little boats are coming by and picking everybody up. The pilot's like walking through the aisles, making sure everybody gets out. The steward is like, listen, this is going down, you better get off. He goes, I want to make sure everybody's there. It's only on those cruise ships where the captain jumps off and leaves everybody, you know what I mean? Like, airplanes, I think they check to make sure everybody's off, you know what I mean? Anyway, the Coast Guard said to him, get back on that ship. He goes, it's sinking. What am I, stupid? Captain goes down with the ship. No, not this guy. I'm out of here. Anyway, so much of a love boat. But anyway, so if we get to love you. Now, that was a split decision. This guy was on all the talk shows, and he was like, listen, you train for a long time to be able to make a decision. But at that moment, I have to make a decision. What do I do? And there's situations where it would be nice if I could decide, I can't decide. What do I do? Yeah? You have a non-from person over at your wine, they pick up at your Seder, and he picks up the bottle of wine to pour for somebody. And it's not mavushal. What do? You gotta do something. Do you drink it? Do you spill it out? Do you scream, Oy You gotta do something. You gotta do something right now. You go to America, and one of your relatives of the opposite gender says, how are you? Gotta do something. I can't just keep looking. Gotta do something. The easiest move is this one. You'd be surprised how fast that other hand goes. Anyway, but you gotta make a decision. B'shas said, right now you gotta do something. And then afterwards, you have to remember Zikron Al Ma'asav. You gotta look at the big picture. So, he says a fascinating thing. Stephen Covey, in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, I heard from my Rabbi all the way, there's a lot of wisdom in that book, so I feel comfortable quoting it. Yeah. He says, write down the 3 things you could do right now that would make the biggest change in your life. Now, he doesn't have to wait for you because it's a book. You can just put the book down. So I could wait for you, but, I'm not. But try to think real fast. What 3 things I could do that would make the major change in my life? And then he says the following. If you think about it, there's 4 different types of decisions you can make. He puts them into 4 quadrants. It says important and urgent, not important and urgent, important and not urgent, and not important and not urgent. Those are the 4 categories. He says if you look at the 3 things that would make the biggest changes in your life, they're in category number 3. They're important but not urgent. Taking care of your car. Servicing your car. It's important, but it's not urgent. But if you don't, then it's going to break down. Now it's urgent, right? I have to do something about it. If you take care of your health, that's good. But that's important, but it's not urgent until you get sick. Then it's important and urgent, That's when you suddenly realize, I really should have gotten that free flu shot they offered. You see, before I get the flu, it's important, but it's not urgent. Once you get the flu, now it's urgent. It's also what we call too late. You understand? And a lot of things are like that. But why don't you take care of it now? Yeah? Because it's not urgent. And we will always go with urgent, whether it's important or not. And he gives an example, which I've seen with my own eyes. You spend a month setting up a meeting. And everybody's there, and suddenly you get a phone call. And you answer the phone call. What are the odds that that phone call is as important as this meeting, which you spent a month setting up? Very slight. But the phone is ringing. That's urgent. It demands my attention. You know, something's happening right now. Someone says, I got to talk to you. Then whatever it is, it's urgent. I have to deal with this now. But it may not be that important. And people will always go with urgent over important. Sometimes it's urgent and important, and you have no choice. But the things that are most important to us, we end up not doing. And that's why if you take a look at your day and your week and your month and your year, how many times do you look at things that are important to you and you never got around to them? You never did them. Because you just went urgent. Urgent, urgent, urgent. So he says, first block in the things that are most important to you. Take a week calendar and write in the things that are most important. That's the concept of koveya itim l'Torah. Things that are important to you, first you block in those times, and everything else has to fit in around it. We have to work around everything else. This is what's important. What's most important to me? If you have your values clear, very often, nonetheless, you won't make good decisions. Because on the spot, you make a decision based on urgent, or somebody wants me now, I have to be here, I don't know. What's most important to you? How do you make those decisions? I may have told the story. Rabbi Meiselman was speaking in Los Angeles and to a high school, and a young man asked him, now that we have satellite communication, when the Beis Din decides when the new month will be, and everybody will know around the world instantly, so do we still have to keep 2 days in Chutz La'aretz? So Rabbi Meiselman says, well, when the Sheikh comes, we'll all move to Israel. And the kid said, what? Give up all this? Give up all this? What's really important to us? We have to start thinking. And more than anything, the Yetzer Hara is stopping us from thinking, because Paro knows you're not going to think about the Geula if you're just so busy. And we are so busy. Busy, busy, busy. Do you remember before there were cell phones? If anybody here is old enough to remember before there were cell phones. Before there were cell phones, it was amazing. You could get into your car and you didn't have to talk to anybody. You had a little time to think. You know? The phone was wired into the wall. You could get a long cord, but they always got really tangled up, and then you ended up having even less room to move than if you had a normal cord, you know? And that was it. And the phone was there, and you know, the phone didn't control you. You controlled the phone. Now everything controls us. They did a study of 1,000 college students, and they cut them off from all of their technology. There was no Twitter, there was no phones, there was no email, there was nothing. They said that they experienced the same reactions as people going through drug and alcohol withdrawal. We're addicted to the constant, never-ending avoda bilti mafsekes. That's always a libam shabnei adam. Who has time to think? That's why it's such an amazing thing when you're in Shul, and the whole room goes silent. And now the words are in front of you, and finally you have a chance to think about everything you have to take care of, because you never have any quiet time. And you're sitting there thinking, oh, I gotta do this, I gotta do that, I gotta... What was that? Oh, I'm dominant. Oh. Almost forgot. But anyway, because you finally have a quiet time. There's nothing there. There was a town in Colorado, up in the mountains, which didn't have TV. They didn't have TV reception. I remember reading about this story in the 1970s. They finally put in the cable that they could get TV, and the whole town voted to take it out. because they realized before it was here, we used to talk, families would do things together, and now it's just, everyone's just totally tuned out, Well, Hashem, we don't do that, we have computers. But, Chas v'shalom, but, you ever feel like sometimes you're walking up and down an escalator, Somebody told me, he says, that at the Gouda convention in America, the Gedolim all came out against the internet. One after another, they all came out against the internet. I said, you were there? He says, no, I saw it the next day on YouTube. Oh, but they're on the escalator. But anyway, this is it. There's no way that this situation can continue. Klal Yisrael is in a situation that it's getting harder and harder to recognize who we are and the greatness within. I heard from a big person, it says, we already hit rock bottom and we started to dig. You look at a situation and say, how can things possibly get worse? And then, Baruch Hashem, it gets worse. You see how the whole world is deteriorating. And the biggest problem is making decisions, thinking, is this what I want to do? What's important to me? Where should I be? What kind of life should I lead? And Paro understood that. You want to stop the Geula? There's just one thing to do. Get people to stop thinking. Don't make them work harder. Make them worry. Don't give them any straw. All they'll think about is straw. Where can I find straw? Is this straw over here? Maybe I can look over there. Maybe this field has one there. Straw, 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 straw. That's all that a person can think about. And you see people always, always think, I gotta do this, I gotta do that, I gotta do that, Constant. Bilti mafsekes. You reach a point where you gotta think. You gotta think. My friend Yechezkel, the article that we heard, those who knew him, this was one of his big themes. He would always stop and think. And he'd always say, and he was a person who would practice what he preached. I had a number of conversations with him where we would ask ourselves this question, is this the best we could be doing? Is our life in the best place? And he had the courage, if he felt not, to make a change. And he would move someplace, or move to a different job, or move to a different situation, because you have to ask yourself, is this the best that we can be doing? And there can't be anything that's off limits from thinking. When I ask myself, is this the best that I can be doing? Is this the best my life can be? I mentioned this already in the past, but this generation has managed to take the art of not thinking and reduce it to one word. Whatever. And there's no response to whatever. You can sit there and talk to somebody and like, yeah, whatever. And that's it. Boom, go on. There's no response. It's just no thinking. Yeah? We're just so busy. And we're accomplishing less and less. And we become less and less. Kodesh Baruch Hu has many ways of helping us focus, should that become necessary. I think we had enough. I think we have enough. We have enough to think about. I think the past 2,000 years has left us with more than enough to reflect upon and to ask ourselves whether or not this is the best we can be, whether or not this is the best situation we can be in. And if it's not, then it's time for us to think very seriously about our lives and say, if this is not the best that I can do. I was talking to a girl in seminary, second year in seminary. She says, I don't think I want to be from anymore. I said, okay, I respect that. Let's follow it through. What are you going to be doing next year? Actually, next year was pretty easy. She went, next year. In 2 years? 2 years was pretty easy. I said, what about when you're 30? What are you going to do when you're 30? Okay. 40? She was getting very uncomfortable. 50? She says, I don't like the way this is turning out. I said, let's keep going. 60? 70? 80? And by the time we were done, she looked at me and said, what's the question? I have to be firm. But in order to do that, you have to think, is this the best I could be doing? If I just do the next thing, most people don't live the life they want, they live the life that happens. They don't make a decision. They don't decide where they want to go. They just end up. Why? Because that's what everybody else does. I told the story with the bear. One of my favorite stories. I probably did. Don't tell you. This guy was in Derech, and he's Baal Tshuva, and his family was totally not supportive, and he was really trying to make it on his own. And he would play basketball with these guys in the mirror. And he was friendly with this one guy. I heard the story from the guy in the mirror. And one time he says to him, you got it made. I'm so jealous of you. You got it made. You come from a family, and you live in Brooklyn, and you went to the right high schools, and you're sitting there learning in the mirror, and you're gonna get a parachute. Your father was gonna support you. You're gonna sit and learn. Everything goes good. And the guy says, "What do you mean? I'm jealous of you." He's jealous of me? What are you jealous of me? I was Baal Tshuva. I'm struggling to learn how to read, just to be able to master the most basic things, and everything's hard for me. When is I'm going to make it? He says, I'll tell you why. And again, he said, I will give you a mashal. Found out later it was in the Reader's Digest. I'll give you a mashal. He says, these two people are walking in the woods, and suddenly this bear jumps out. So one guy drops to the ground and starts tying his shoelaces. And his friend says, what are you doing? You can't outrun a bear. He says, I don't have to outrun the bear, I just have to outrun you. He says, me, I'm just running against the next guy in the mirror. I'm not being pushed to be my best. You're running against the bear. There's nobody else for you to run against. You're just trying to be the best you. Most of us are running against the next person saying, please Hashem, let the bear eat my friend. But how many of us look at ourselves running against the bear saying, I want to achieve my personal best? If we can look at the world and say, this can't be the best, it's got to be better than this. There's got to be a world where there's a lot more happiness and love and security, and acceptance and, and all those good things that has made the Jewish people what we have been. So much Kedusha, so much Torah, so much meaning. So we have to really stop and think about ourselves. I have to think about ourselves and decide, how can I make myself into the best me? And if everybody works on trying to make themselves into the best me, then Klal Yisrael could be the best Klal Yisrael. And Emetz Hashem will be Zeicha once again to that Nemes Agula. Thank you very much.
You didn't disturb. This is a tremendous cover. I hadn't even gotten started.
Can you put the song in? How are you? How are you keeping? It's good to see you. It's amazing.
What are you doing with this? Do you have
I give to the family and I give to the road.
yeah, can I get a copy? Maybe you make it put on your list. It helped out a lot. Mother's only a really good electric toothbrush.
Really good?
I'll show it to you later.
It's very good. Yeah, it's good. This song is maybe a piece of this song. In the Solomon. Amy Solomon wrote this. He was a friend of the Chris.
That's something. That's center one.
And so the one I
It's an amazing talk, hey? Let's just take a picture of very amazing. I'll give a copy, it's good. Thank you very much.